Welcome back everybody to the Raid Mastery series, the place where I will be revisiting every raid in the game, providing a concise modern guide full of tips, tricks, easy skips and meta recommendations. Once again, for the purposes of keeping the video at a reasonable length, I will assume that players watching these guides will have somewhat of a baseline understanding of each raid covered, so as to not get too far in depth on the core mechanics and focus more on the modern strategies used within them. So, today we're tackling perhaps the easiest and most controversial raid in the game, Root of Nightmares. Entrance. The entrance level is relatively short compared to most other raids since the default route to the first encounter isn't particularly long, nor are there any introductory mechanics to complete. Before we begin talking about the first encounter, we're first going to cover some improved routes to get there faster, starting with the route on screen. Simply go to the edge of the first walkway and skate or sword jump across to this large petal, then climb up the smaller petals, making sure not to veer too far left as this will begin the encounter, and just like that, you're already there. The second alternative route that is slightly faster involves jumping up this broken pillar near spawn and performing what's known as a barrier surf. This tech involves jumping forwards and upwards at a specific angle and hitting an invisible barrier that will thrust you forwards at speed if done correctly, which allows you to skip the initial running part for the other route. Once everyone has made it over, it's time to talk about the first encounter, Cataclysm. As far as loadouts are concerned, this encounter is purely ad focused with occasional high health tormentors spawning in, therefore I am recommending strong ad clear setups like Solar Warlock with Sunbraces, Arc Hunters and Solar or Strand Titans. Notable weapons for efficiently killing tormentors are Scission, Divinity and especially Forerunner. For those who are uninitiated, Forerunner is a monster when it comes to killing tormentors, so give it a try if you haven't already. Now onto the core mechanic of the entire raid, node activation. To activate a dormant node indicated by a floating dark blob, shoot the active root node to gain field of light, bringing this buff to the dormant node and shooting it, which will now activate said node. You can also activate the node by meleeing the base of it, and this works on any class. The location of the active root node changes during the node running phase, so make sure to keep an eye out for where it moves. Now that we've covered the basic mechanics, we're next going to talk about the three ways you can choose to run this encounter, the first of which is solo running. As the name suggests, solo running involves one person doing every node wave by themselves. If you're in a group where you're the most experienced and everyone else isn't so confident, this is likely the best approach since even for solo it's pretty hard to mess up and you normally have plenty of time to complete the circuit. While this is happening, make sure your team are actively killing scions and tormentors to extend the wipe timer. The next method is known as duo running and it's considerably faster. Once again, as the name suggests, this time we have two people running the nodes communicating with each other along the way. This method works as you'd expect. Instead of one player having to constantly run back to the active root node, the second player is already there ready to hit it once the first player's node is completed. Player 2 then moves on to their next node while player 1 waits at the new active root for the activation call, and then player 1 moves on to their next node and player 2 returns to the active root node, and so on and so on. This method is much faster, but you can take things a step further with method 3, and by now I'm sure you've guessed what this is, and yes, it's trio running. Trio running is a little more complicated than duo, but I will do my best to explain with a visual example. In trio running, two players run the majority of the nodes while the third player, known as the base, hits the active root node upon request from the other runners. And once the other runners have hit their nodes, the base player hits his node and returns to the new active route to play base once more. For example, myself, Mike and Styx are the runners. We first all grab buff initially. Mike goes to the first node and Styx goes to the second. Mike hits first, he then calls out shoot to indicate it's been activated, and then since my job is the base, I hit the root and then Styx hits second. I reactivate the node for the third time and then hit the third node, and then finally Mike hits the new base, running to the last node and completing the circuit.
Okay. Shoot.
Go.
Now you go to second last. Yep.
It does seem fairly complicated, however, once you understand it, this method is fairly simple, but it does require good communication from your runners, so if you're not particularly confident with this, it's best to either solo or duo run. A couple more general things to note about this encounter is that every time a tormentor dies, it will spawn a barrier champion on the opposite side, so if a tormentor spawns left side and dies, expect a barrier to spawn on the right side. Furthermore, if your runners are particularly fast on any running phase and a tormentor is still alive, it can be worth leaving it alive and only killing it once the new round begins, indicated by the wipe timer reappearing on screen. However, only bother doing this on any round after the first, since in the first round, regardless if you're doing solo, duo, or trio running, there is no need to spawn a tormentor. Once you've completed every wave, it's time to move on to the 1-2 transition. Similar to King's Fall, the transitions in Route of Nightmares are a glorious playground where you can fully flex any movement tech you know, so to start things off, I'm going to show my variation of the 1-2 skip on Warlock, but keep in mind there are multiple ways of pulling this off. Once you make it to the top, make sure to backtrack slightly in order to hit a load zone located here, which properly spawns in the next encounter. For hunters, the skip takes a bit longer, but overall it's pretty simple.
If I had a
Titans, unfortunately, since this skip involves gaining height, you're kind of out of luck. I'm sure you can find some spots where you can use a grapple to get ahead a bit, but you're stuck with running the normal route, unfortunately. Once everyone is up, it's time to move on to Scission. Once again, this encounter involves the same node activation mechanic from before, but this time with an added set of new nodes known as the Dark Nodes. Loadouts remain the same, and if runners are confident in their sword skating abilities, I would advise using them. There are multiple ways of increasing the speed and efficiency of this encounter, and I will briefly touch on the two most popular methods used by endgame players, the first of which is known as duo running. To start, split your group 3-3 on either side of the chasm and assign one runner on each side. Each runner should hit their initial active node and cross the chasm using the method of their choosing. Once their node on the other side has been activated, instead of crossing the chasm to get back to their side, each runner should then do the second node on the respective side they crossed to, since the order of node activation in Scission works on a close far basis. For example, if you start on light, your first light node is on dark side, so you cross the chasm and activate it, then your next light node is back on light side. However, the next dark node is now on dark side, which is where you are, so it makes more sense for you to help out your dark runner and hit their dark node instead of having to cross back. Similarly, your dark runner will hit your next light node for you as well. Remember though, anytime you cross a side, you and your partner need to call to each other whenever you hit your nodes in order to not disrupt each other's circuit when going for the next node on that side. For example, if I started on light side but my partner skates across the chasm faster than I do and he hits his first dark node fairly fast, he has to wait for me to hit my light node before he can grab the light buff again. After this is done, you both grab the buff on your respective side and cross back to your original side and start again until the floor is complete. I will now play a short example clip of duo running.
It's a tune, bro.
Light.
Dark.
Oh my god, this fucking outro.
Right.
I only have Frank on my side, it's pretty
Nah, I'm there
horrific.
too now. It's good.
light.
Moving on, if you want to speed things up a bit, you can instead do what's known as 4-man running. Similar to duo running, 4-man running involves one extra runner on each side that exclusively deals with the close side nodes, meaning the runners crossing the chasm only need to worry about the nodes on the opposite side. Once again, for this to work, you must call out the corresponding affinity of your buff once you activate each node, and this goes for the close side runners also. Once you return to your original side, if all is well, the buff would have moved, and we can now start over by crossing once more after we get the buff again. This method is a little more confusing and takes some getting used to, but I promise it will speed things up. I will now play an example of 4-man running. Light.
Big section, yeah, you can go right.
Light.
Fuck.
I'm always gonna be first, so.
With the video.
Guardian down.
No, JP. Tragedy.
Well, surely it's fun, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool.
Once you've finished a floor, to ascend you can either use the elevators, or if your side clears ads faster than the other, you can use the following routes shown on screen to climb to the next floor, known as early flooring. Specifically, if you choose to duo run, you should always early floor. Another more general thing to know about Scission is that elevator lunge is actually tied to your FPS. The higher your FPS, the higher the elevator will send you, and the lower your FPS, the more horizontal it will send you. Repeat whichever method you choose for each floor, and once you're done, we move on to the 2-3 transition, but before that, I quickly want to go over efficiently completing the transition hub, so without further ado, transition hubs. In order to open the way forward into the 2-3 transition, you first need to get through the transition hub, which consists of connecting 3 nodes on each side, 2 of them in the walls either side, and the final 2 dead in the middle. Again, you can speed this process up by having 2 people begin at each node, 1 player goes ahead and hits the first node, then the second player hits the root and runs to the second node, and by this time the first player should grab buff from the new root and hit the final node in the middle. I'll let this short example play out so you get a good understanding. Yeah, that's fine. God. Oh, so efficient. Once you're through, we are now on to the 2-3 transition. This transition is the first area that refuges are relevant, and to make one, simply carry the light buff to a dark node and voila, Darkness Refuge. In terms of the route, the full Warlock skip can be seen on screen now. The route for Hunters is similar but with some added jumps since they can't gain height like Warlocks can. Titans, again, I'm afraid you're out of luck, but at least this time you can sword fly from the entrance to roughly the halfway point. One complaint you'll typically see in LFG is that people who skip are stopping people who can't from getting the secret chest. However, this is not true. Once you're at the platforms near the door to secret chest, follow the route on screen which will take you right up to the next level without the need for the 6-man door. Finally, if you're the first to the exit, there are a couple spots you can stand in where the darkness blast won't hit you, these being far off to the left, or my personal favourite, up on the right branch. Once everyone makes it, prepare yourselves for boss encounter number 1. Explicator. The main objective from this encounter is to move the odd planets from each side onto the other side. Light planets live on left side and dark planets live on right side. A map of the encounter with the numbered planets is on screen, but as a rule of thumb, just remember that 2 and 5 are against the walls. In terms of loadouts, I would recommend having 2 Well of Radiance Warlocks since the damage phase can last over 30 seconds, and the rest should be purely damage supers, and I'll explain why in a second. For weapons, everyone should be using rockets, so make sure you have a Galahorn and a Tractor on the team. Begin the encounter by clearing ads until the Centurions spawn in the middle. Killing them will trigger the Colossuses to spawn on each elevated platform, and killing them will grant planetary insight. Using your planetary insight, determine which planets are the odd ones on your side, communicate this to the opposite side by calling them out or typing them in chat, then interact with the correct planet and move it to the other side. Once the initial planet swapping has occurred, if done correctly, a new wave of Centurions and Colossuses will spawn that must be defeated in order to reveal the middle 3 planets, also known as the Index planets. The Index planets will always be 2 of one color and 1 of the other, and you will once again need to move the correct planets from the outside into the middle to begin the DPS phase. Keep in mind the order in which you step on plates is always one of the double color first, then the single color, then the second double. For example, if it's 2 light 1 dark, dark is left and light is mid and right, The order in which you step on can either be mid left right or right left mid. Before you begin damage, have your Warlock place a well in the middle of the room rather than the damage plates so that a well isn't wasted on each of the plates. Once you are on the correct plate and ready to damage, instead of damaging straight away, you must instead coordinate with your team by performing a countdown in order to maximize the potential damage per plate. This is done because once the health bar threshold is hit, you only have about 2 seconds before he goes immune, so you must properly coordinate your damage in order to ensure the best results. If you are using damage supers like Needlestorm or Blade Barrage, always use your super immediately after the threshold is hit on the 3rd plate. If you unfazed, good job, it's pretty tight. If not, repeat the whole process and get ready for the next transition, the 3-4 transition. Similar to the 2-3 transition, you first need to make your way through another hub area, but once you are through, the 3-4 transition begins. Thankfully there is no Darkness Blast this time, and the Warlock route is now playing on screen. The route is pretty similar for hunters. Once again, follow the on-screen showcase. And for the last time, Titans, pack it up, there's nothing for you here. Nezarec. Welcome to the final encounter, which is once again a simple circuit of running light and dark nodes. Weapon-wise, rockets are the optimal pick here, so keep the same loadouts from the previous encounter. Split your team 2-2-2 on left, middle and right, and be sure to dedicate one player to taking Nezarec's hatred. To do this, simply shoot his middle crit once it starts glowing with any suitable precision weapon like a sniper, forerunner, or my personal favourite, Ariana's Vow. This player should also be responsible for breaking his shoulders to reveal the correct refuge. And while this isn't necessary on the first phase, if you don't end up one-phasing, you will need to know the colour of the refuge on the second phase, since by default it is around 15 seconds shorter in length. Much like first and second encounter, you can either choose to have one player run the nodes on each side, or if you want to be faster, do 2 or more. Once both node circuits are complete, damage will begin shortly after. However, there are some tricks you can employ here to give you the most, pleasant experience when fighting this boss. First and foremost, damage should always be done on the final light node. Any other node stinks and you're a loser if you use any other node. Just kidding. And second, normally in most raid boss encounters, it is optimal to clear as many ads as possible before damage, so nothing gets to flinch you super hard or distract you. On Nezarec, however, the death of the ads is directly tied to when he starts damage, meaning if there are no ads alive, damage starts almost instantly once the nodes are completed. The reason you want to leave as many ads alive before damage is because if you didn't know already, Nezarec is perhaps the worst behaved raid boss in the entire game, and sometimes he can just run off in any direction he chooses, far, far away from the damage location. In order to prevent him from going off to Narnia, please leave the ads alive. Thank you. Fingers crossed Nezarec behaves well and you one-face him like a champ, which to be completely honest, you probably should be, since Nezarec is one of the weakest bosses in the game. And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this modern guide for Route of Nightmares. So, next time you're running it, feel free to try out the tips and tricks you learned here, and I promise you'll have a more fun experience.